Hola a todos, este es el señor Munsan y continuamos en Opinar Factoring. Hoy estamos viendo Factoring Quadrilaterals que tienen un coeficiente que no es igual a 1, lo que sea que eso significa. Este video sale a Junior en mi primera clase, periodo que ama tortas. Disfrute y luego pasar al video cuando esté listo.
All right, so let's take a look at things what we're going to call quadratics. Quadratics are equations that have a variable in it, an x or whatever, that's has a squared term to it, right? The exponent is 2. And so that's what a quadratic is. Because it has 3 terms, we're going to call it a trinomial. So we're going to work with these quadratics doing different things in this video. Mainly we're going to start by looking at factor. So when we factor something, it basically turns it into things being multiplied that if I was to multiply them out, they would get back to what I had. So when I go to factor, I turn things that are like this trinomial into things that are being multiplied. In this case, this example here, I have some number out front here, and then I have what we call a binomial and another binomial. And the reason it's binomial is because each one of those have 2 terms in it. So did you write that down? What a binomial was? If you didn't, that's part of your vocabulary, okay? All right, so here's an example of that kind of template. I have 5 times a quantity of 3x plus 7 times a quantity of x minus 4. Okay? So this is the factors of some trinomial. When it comes to factoring, there's lots of different methods out there. Okay, if you have a method that you know of factoring and it works for you every single case, I'm not going to force you into factoring the way I'm factoring. You use yours. If you did a factoring method in the past and it's just a matter of you doing the research to remind yourself what it is, then you go do that, and then that becomes your tool for factoring, so you're welcome to use it. But I'm going to concentrate on 2 types of factoring in my class so that at least you have these methods. One is guess and check, and the other one is grouping, okay? And that's what we're going to concentrate in this lesson. All right, so what we're going to do is, again, we're going to be focusing on grouping and guess and check to factoring. Now, this is something that's already been factored. It's 2 things multiplied. I just want to take a few seconds and review the FOIL method, okay? So we have F here, outside, inside, and then the last, okay? Now, when I go to multiply those out, I get a 2x squared for the first set of terms being multiplied. I get a negative ax for that one, and then a 3x. And then for the last 2 terms, 3 and negative 4, I get negative 12. Okay? So I know that these terms go together, and so I'll end up with negative 5x. And I'll just simply write the expanded part of that. Okay? So a couple of things I really want to point out is this term right here is created by this first term set, right? The first 2 pieces that multiply through, that 2x squared is created by these 2 first terms being multiplied, right? And then this last term here, this negative 12, is created by multiplying these 2 last terms, right? And then this middle term is created by the addition of those 2 terms. So keep that in mind as we go through this next section of factoring. So we're going to go ahead and factor this, but we're going to look at a guess and check method, okay? So the guess and check method, again, I'm looking to create 2 things that multiply together that give me that thing. Now remember, this term here is created by whatever I have in this spot and this spot. And this term right here is created with whatever I have in this spot and this spot. Some things to identify is I have a negative here that tells me that one of the terms that are red in that red spot, one of the terms is positive, one is negative. All right, let's take a look at coming up with some ideas for numbers that will create the blue and the red spots. All right, so to create the 4x squared, some choices would be 2x, and then 4x and 4x, or 4x and x. Some choices for the negative 21 would be negative 3 and 7, and negative 7 and 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to put those choices, we have a few extra choices here, we're going to look at putting those choices into their appropriate spots. We'll check and see if it generates what we're looking for, okay? So again, it comes back to picking the numbers that create the blue and the red spots and then checking it. So this is why it's called guess and check. I'm going to slide my choices over there to keep them out of the way so I can think through this. Again, you should be copying this down in your notes. Make sure you're paying attention, not doing something different. Let's use that 2x and that 2x for our guess at the first position. Okay, so now we chose those because 2x times 2x is 4x squared. And then we'll just choose one of the terms for the other side. Negative 3 and, oops, I'm sorry. So I'm going to use that negative 3 and negative 7. Kind of had to fix what I did there. And what I'm going to do is I've picked my blue and my red numbers to generate over here in the original the blue and red numbers, okay? So that's all good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to check with what I call my double smile, the things that are going to create the outer and the inner terms that come together to create that 25x. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this. I'm going to go ahead and do my my inner term, which is a negative 6x. That's the negative 3 times the 2x. And then the other one is 14x. And then I'm going to add those together. And in this case, I end up with 8x. I'm not looking for 8x. I'm looking for 25x. So what I'm going to do is erase, and I'm going to try something different. Now, change one thing at a time, okay? I'm going to keep the two x's, and I'm just going to maybe take the 7 and the 3 and move them to different positions. And in this case, I'm going to pick the negative 7 and the positive 3, and let's see what that generates for us. So after a few times of doing this, we start seeing things that are not really going to be generating anything new for us, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start over. I'm going to get rid of the 2x. I've already tried it with the 3 and the 7 in different positions. Now I'm going to work with the 4x and x. So I'll put those in their appropriate places. And then I'll try again, negative 3 and positive 7, okay? I'll use my double smile to check it. I'll add those two things together, and I get 25x. That's what I was looking for. Since I picked my blue numbers to give me that very first term, 4x squared, and I picked my red numbers to give me the last term, all that needed to happen now was that my outer and my inner, my double smile, would create the two numbers that when put together create that middle term. Once I've done that, I found my factors, okay? Now we're going to be working with this 4x squared plus 25x minus 21 a couple of times, okay, in different scenarios. I don't want you to worry about what the answer is of factoring it. I just want you to watch and concentrate on the process. So let's look at another method called grouping. So in grouping, we're going to do the exact same one. It's a different way of factoring it. It's more systematic, and it's not so much guess and check, okay? There is a little bit of guess and check, but there's not as much. Before we get started, I want to make sure that you understand what things look like and how to manipulate them, okay? So looking at this 4x3 times 3 minus 4x5, it's basically two numbers that are being subtracted, okay? What they have in common, though, is this 4x. So if I was to factor that out, that means I see that both of those terms have a 4x. I pull it away, and then I should be able to write what is left over. Now I can certainly simplify that. And I can even simplify that even more. And I'm done. Okay? But more importantly, I want you to see how these things were in common. And I could see that even though one had parentheses around it, one didn't, I could see that they were in common, so I could pull that factor out. Let's take a look at the next problem right below it. What do they have in common? Well, I see a 4w in common. Okay? So I'm going to pull that 4w out. It's kind of reverse of distributing, right? So I get 4w. And then what's left over is that 3x in that first term, right? And then this minus, and then the 5x, right? And so then I can simplify that even more or whatever. Most importantly, what I'm trying to draw your attention is that we had two terms that were being subtracted. They could have been being added, didn't matter, but they had something in common that could be pulled out. So let's start this process called group. Now the neat thing about grouping is it's not so much guess and check, but it's more about a process. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with this grouping. What we're going to do is we're going to set up some workspace for us. We're looking for two numbers, A and B, that when they multiply together, they create negative 84. So where did I get that? I did this. 4 times negative 21. So I took the first and the last numbers, and I generated a negative 84. Okay? Now I'm looking for two numbers that add together to give me 25. Where did I get that 25? That's that middle term, okay? So you need to identify how I just got that. You'll have your space. You'll have to do this multiple times to kind of get this process in order. So again, we're looking for two numbers that multiply together to give me negative 84, but add together to give me 25. So let's look at a couple of choices. For right now, it doesn't matter where my negative is, okay? So just, we'll put it over on the 1. But when I multiply these together, I certainly get negative 84. But man, negative 1 and 84 are just too far apart to be 25 units when you add them together, right? Since it's a difference. That will never come close to 25. So we know it's not that case. And quite frankly, that's going to be too far apart as well. So I'm just going to kind of keep on looking at this process of what numbers multiply together to give me 84, and then ask myself, will it get me close to when I put them together, will it generate that 25? Negative 3 and 28, very interesting. Okay, so let's take a look at. So the next step is you take the first term, in this case it's 4x squared, okay, and then the last term, which is negative 21, and you kind of put them on as bookcase endings, right? You're just going to have one on one side, one on the other. And then you're going to bring these two numbers into the mix. Now, there's an important way of doing this, okay? What you want to do is you look at these numbers, and this will always be the case. Look at negative 3 and 28. And when you look at those two numbers, 28 and 4 have a common number. They're both divisible by 4. 3 and 21 are both divisible by 3. This will always happen. One number will have a common factor with one of those numbers up on the left-hand side, right? So when I generate the two numbers, they have to be factored with the other ones. You'll see why it's important in just a minute. But how I stick them into my problem is very important. I want to put this one in a very special place because it goes with that 21. And this one, which has a factor of 4 in it, goes over with the 4. So notice what I did. I brought the two numbers over. I stuck an X after them, and that's my next step, right? So to kind of review, I looked at taking 4, the first number, the coefficient, the 1 at the very beginning, and the negative 21. I generated negative 84. And then I generated 25 by just simply pulling it out of the equation. And now I started looking for what two numbers multiply together to give me that negative 84 and add together to give me 25. And I started seeking that out, and I found them, negative 3 and 28. I slid them into position, putting X's after them. I put them in position so that this number, which is easily associated with 21, and this number here, easily associated with 4, because they have common factors, okay? So now we're almost there. All right. So here we have it. That first set of terms has a common factor of 4, so I'm going to pull that out of that first set of numbers. I pulled 4 out, and I'm left with x squared. I'm sorry, they have a common factor of x as well, so let's pull out the 4 and the x, and I'm left with x plus 7, right? If I multiply these through, again, going that way, I end up back with what I just got, minus, and these terms have a 3 in common. So take a look. I'm pulling out a negative 3 from both of those. So I end up x plus 7 Okay, now very important. If you did this right, you'll always end up with these two terms being exactly the same. Okay? All right, so let's see that they both have an x plus 7 in common. This is what I was showing you before. They both have an x plus 7, and what's left over is the 4x. So I pulled the x plus 7 away from the 4x, minus 3, because I pulled the x plus 7 away from it. And there's my factors. X plus 7, 4x minus 3. And just like our guess and check method, we did it and got the exact same factors for it. So now I think this method is pretty brilliant. I also think that it can be somewhat complicated. And so doing a couple of those, and we'll practice those in class, will allow you to identify if this is a method that you want to hold on to. Just a real quick word of caution. When you have numbers like this, you could start right away trying to guess and check or do factoring. But what I always try to do is ask myself, is there something that they have in common so I can reduce these numbers because they're huge? And sure enough, they have a common 4. So I pull it out, and then what I do is I start factoring it. Okay? Don't forget to bring this 4 along with the problem. Okay? So we've already done that kind of problem, and you could do it through guess and check or grouping. It doesn't matter. Let's look at using factoring to solve equations. So the first step is to get everything on one side, make it equal to 0. I noticed that they had a common 3, so I pulled that out. Makes it much simpler. I did my factoring process on the x squared plus 5x plus 6, and I got my factors to be x plus 2 and x plus 3. I take each one of my factors and I set it equal to 0, and then I just simply solve for the x that makes that 0. Okay? Now, most of you can do that one in your head. And I want you to understand this is the process. When it's difficult, if you understand the process, when it's difficult, it's just a matter of following the process, okay? So it won't be so clear-cut in the future with a little bit harder factors. So make sure you're practicing the process. How about this? Could you sketch this graph? So what I would tell you is the very first step is to factor it, okay? So I do the factoring process. Maybe it's guess and check, maybe it's grouping, okay? But it's, in any case, it's a matter of factoring it, okay? So then the next thing is you set each one of those things to 0. Once you've done that, go and find those numbers on the x-axis and put a point there. Now an x-squared graph is a curve, okay? And so what I want to do is find halfway in between, exactly in the middle of those 2 points. So this is what I know. I know my graph is going to be a U-shaped graph, and where that little slash is at negative 1.5, that's where it's going to go down and then come back up, okay? We can get one more value that will help us draw it. Look at this number right here, this negative 4. That negative 4 tells me my graph crosses that axis right there, okay? So that last number tells me where it crosses the y-axis. So now what I'm going to do is just simply draw the best ability of a curve that goes like that, okay? And that's pretty good. I missed my mark, okay? But anyway, that's pretty decent. All right, so here's a real quick question. Could you come up with a y equals some equation where it actually go through negative 3 and positive 4 on the x-axis? That's a parabola. That's a really simple question. So what you do is this. This is an example of an equation. Not the only equation, but this is an example of it. You would simply go x plus 3 and x minus 4, and then you'd FOIL that out. And there's an example of an equation that's going to cross the x-axis at negative 3 and positive 4. And there you have it. All right. Enjoy your try-it problems. Bring those in next class. Remember, there is no green sheets anymore. If you don't do this, it's a 0